Skyrim is a fantastic game, and I think it excels in a lot of ways, but there are definitely areas it could stand to be improved. So with this pack, I aim to make it a more enjoyable RPG experience using a wide selection of mods. I've made sure that all of these mods will work on Xbox, and have kept the file size to a more reasonable amount to account for the storage limit imposed on consoles. For those of you who are on PC, I've linked a Nexus Mods page in the description that you can use to download the whole pack in one go. I've also grouped the mods into categories, which you can skip to on the timeline of this video. So let's get into the mod pack itself. I'm going to be starting with some mods that make major changes to the game's mechanics, the first of which is rebalanced leveled lists. This isn't a massive mod, but it does fundamentally change how you play the game. Essentially, what this mod does is it beefs up the amount of loot you get from dungeon end chests, those being the more ornate ones found after killing the final boss. Skyrim is notorious for being stingy when it comes to loot, but now you can actually find random equipment that's useful, crafting ingredients that have some value to them, and plenty of things to sell. I mainly wanted to do this because I feel like when playing through vanilla Skyrim, we're kind of limited on our methods of progression. If you're playing as a character that wears armour and uses weapons, then essentially the gear you find is irrelevant. All that matters is that you level up smithing and enchanting as fast as possible. And when you do find gear you find appealing, it's not because you plan on using it, it's because you plan on destroying it to put the enchantment on something you made yourself. The power of those skills is still an issue here, but with the rebalancing I found myself at least sometimes coming across equipment in chests that was worth using. Next, I have a mod that rebalances weapons and enemies to create a resistance and weakness system. It's called Know Your Enemy. This mod gives enemies and armors different traits, such as metal or undead, and then adds a multiplier to damage types against that trait, making your weapon choice much more relevant. For example, metal armors offer better protection against swords and axes than they do against maces and hammers, and are weaker to shock damage. The main benefit of this mod is it promotes using multiple weapons, and stops you from falling back on just one thing over and over. So if you're playing as a stealth archer, that's great, but you're going to have to switch to something different when fighting dwarven machines, because they're resistant to arrows. The resistances can be found online if you want them, but you can also learn for yourself by testing things. Then there's a set of Know Your Enemy books that are placed within leveled lists that give information and a small buff when found. The first of which concerns armour, and can be bought from any blacksmith. One warning I would give if you are using this mod is that it changes weapon stats in the inventory screen to not always be accurate. Skyrim weapon damages are written based on what they would do if used against the player, meaning that now weapons will look like they do different damage depending on what armour you're wearing. However, you can still easily check the regular damage numbers by taking off your armour, and this system is a useful way to test what damage your weapons would do against different gear. To support this combat mod, I've added in Wildcat, which makes a variety of changes to how fighting works, and most noticeably, the effect that stamina has in it. Now you lose stamina by making any attack, and strikes made with no stamina do less damage, meaning you have to be more wary of making unnecessary attacks. Also, there are some new injuries that can be caused when you are brought below a certain health in combat, making close fights have more of an impact on you. There are a lot of other features, and the mod offers full customization, so I'd recommend taking a more in-depth look yourself. With the goal of rebalancing in mind, I have a mod called Tonics and Toxins that changes potions and food. The biggest change is with potions that would normally provide an instant replenishing of stats, which now offer a slower effect that gives you a similar amount but spread out over a few seconds. The main point of this is to prevent you from spamming healing potions or food in any situation to save yourself from death, whilst still making them useful things to have. Food is more drastically changed, now offering little to no healing or replenishing. Instead, they have a smaller buff to things like regeneration that last for a longer period of time, making it useful to eat right before a big battle for the extra buffs. As well as potions, I wanted some mods to overhaul enchantments and spells, so I have also brought Apocalypse Magic of Skyrim and Summer Mist enchantments. Apocalypse adds a whole host of new spells into the game that can be bought and found the same way as others. I think the biggest benefit of them is the way that they flesh out every school of magic, making them feel a bit less one-note. So for example, there are now some alteration spells that have a bit more offensive utility in combat, so you're not always dependent on destruction and conjuration. There are other spell mods that can absolutely work alongside Apocalypse, but for a character that isn't entirely spell-focused, this is more than enough. Although I'm probably going to cover some more spell mods in a future video. Then Summer Mist adds in lots of new enchantments, which can be found on items in chests or at vendors as normal. There are some really creative enchantments in here that feel way more fun to use than the base game ones. Some of my favourite that I've come across so far are the Luck enchantment that gives a 2% chance every second to gain a large chunk of health, stamina or magicka. And then Death Ward, which reduces the amount of damage you take when your health is below 25%. This is just a great mod to have if you're looking to mix up your usual playstyle, and not just stick to the standard enchantments you go for once you've leveled the appropriate skills. I also have the mod collection, The Art of Smithing, which acts as a general improvement of the blacksmithing system. The mods included are Smeltdown, Smelting and Tanning level smithing, Super simple smithing overhaul, House building level smithing, Extra craftables, Alternate smithing categories, and Craft lockpicks. They are available together, but can also be downloaded separately, so you can pick and choose what you want. I personally tend to use them all except Smeltdown, which I only download for characters that are smithing focused. The super simple smithing overhaul only really changes how upgrading gear works. In the base game there was a cap on how much equipment could be improved based on its material, meaning for example steel could not be upgraded to legendary no matter how good your smithing is. This removes that rule, meaning that while lower stat armor is still going to be worse than better stuff even when it's upgraded, it's to a lesser degree, making it more viable for longer. I really think this helps build on what I was trying to do with the rebalanced leveled lists, as now if you find gear with a good enchantment, you can realistically still make good use of it, even if it's a material slightly lower than your current gear. The alternate smithing categories is also really cool, grouping things based on item type instead of material, which makes it a lot easier to compare your different options when crafting. The other mods are all useful as well, and I mainly have them for convenience, to allow for more options when crafting, and to allow for background leveling without having to actually grind the skill like you normally would. Next, I have Truer Minimalistic Faiths of Skyrim, which adds in better effects for each of the shrines found in the game, without completely taking over your character. You can pray at any shrine, and doing so makes you a follower of that deity. Being a follower of deity allows you to pray to them anywhere you like to gain boons. Each one offers a passive effect that lasts for 3 hours and are quite similar to the ones in the base game, but then there is also an active effect that occurs at the moment you pray, such as revealing map markers or instantly cooling down shouts. I think it's a great addition, and it makes the deity you follow a decision that is far more relevant to gameplay than it normally would be. Now we have Vokri, which acts as an overhaul of the perk system. It is more lightweight than the Ordinator perk overhaul, which is also a good option if you want it. I personally just prefer the smaller version, as I find Ordinator can force you to become more specialised than I want to be with my skills. I have used both in the past though, it really just comes down to the character you're playing at the time. So you're going to want to try them a bit before deciding which is best for you. Next we have Imperius and Andromeda. These are pretty straightforward, they simply overhaul the races system and the Standing Stone powers to make them more interesting and noticeable. Some examples to the racial changes are new starting stats, as well as a unique quest for each race to unlock further powers. And one of the more interesting standing stones now is the Lady Stone, which allows you to summon a Spirit Protector to help you in battle. Both mods are pretty small in terms of file size, and are pretty much just improvements in my eyes. Then we have Thunderchild, which adds a whole bunch of new shouts into the game, and some mechanics offering a little more utility to shouts in combat. A new library is added to High Hrothgar, where you can learn about these new shouts by completing a meditation minigame. The new shouts are sort of variants of the old ones, using the same words of power but rearranged and recontextualized to do different things. The mod also adds totems to the world, which you can meditate at to gain buffs to specific shouts, in a similar way to how you can meditate with Paarthurnax in the base game. These additions to the world do clash a bit with some of the environmental mods I've added later on. I have a patch included that fixes the interior problems, like the library door in High Hrothgar, but there are still some clashes with the totem locations that are too close to settlements, such as this one near Dawnstar, which can't be reached. I find it doesn't affect much, as it's only the odd totem, but I thought it was worth mentioning because I haven't yet found a fix for it. If I do, I'll add the patch into a pinned comment so that you can download it. I have another 2 mods that are extremely good, but only if you play without fast travelling. The first is Convenient Horses. It makes horse riding much less annoying. You can do things like summon your horse anywhere, use it to store things, as well as harvest ingredients and loot corpses without having to dismount. The other is I Need, which adds a hunger and tiredness system to the game. The survival mode is another option if you want this alongside weather mechanics, but the main benefit of I Need over survival mode is that it reacts a lot better to food from other mods, as when you try to eat something it doesn't recognise, you simply have to input what it is, and it'll remember that for the rest of the save. The reason I say to only use this if you aren't fast travelling is because I've always found that the food and water mechanics are cool when travelling is a relevant part of the game. It feels more like an element of gameplay. When you're fast travelling, it turns into more of a chore. It's a lot less fun, but that's just my opinion. You can use it as you see fit. The next group of mods I'm going to talk about are smaller quality of life fixes. These are just general improvements that deal with specific issues the game has, so a lot of them may only be needed if the issue would affect the type of character you're playing on that particular playthrough. The first of these mods is the Paarthurnax Dilemma, which allows you to refuse to kill Paarthurnax but still join the Blades Guild and complete the quests that come with it. Then we have a couple focused around the Thieves Guild, starting with Thieves Guild for Good Guys. This reworks some of the Thieves Guild quests to remove ones that are more amoral, such as threatening locals for money. It tries to rework the Thieves Guild into something that fits more into a steal from the rich and give to the poor style, making it more appropriate for good aligned characters. Alternatively, if you'd prefer, you could use the mod Destroy the Thieves Guild to be given an alternative to joining them altogether, instead being tasked with wiping out the members and finding evidence on Maven Blackbriar's involvement with them. We also have Stones of Berenzia quest markers, which makes it a lot easier to find them all without having to search them up online, and Choose Guild Jobs, allowing you to select which city you'll be sent to on missions yourself, to speed up the process of becoming the guild master. I've added Buyable Golden Claw and Unread Books Glow, which are pretty self-explanatory, and then we have Kontrol, which adds some new commands to your controller, allowing for things like quick access to menus. The main benefit I find with this mod is the ability to access up to 8 favorited items and spells without having to enter any menu at all, which is great for switching weapons mid-battle without breaking up the flow of combat. Next is Left Hand Rings Complete, which allows you to find and craft rings that are worn on the left hand, meaning that you can have 2 rings at once. There are mods that allow for as many as 10 rings, but I think that this is a much more balanced compromise. Another mod to improve the feel of combat is Dynamic Camera, which allows you to make some changes to how your camera acts in certain situations. I personally like to use it to move the camera further back when I'm in combat, but there are a good selection of features available to make the camera behave exactly how you want. Next, we have Dawnguard map markers, which adds a bunch of map markers to locations like the Solcairn to make them much easier to navigate. I have a couple of mods now focusing on skill progression, starting with Sleep to Level Up, which takes the mechanic from the survival mode, requiring you to sleep in order to gain the stat increase and perk points from your level up. I think it helps add to the feel of an RPG, as though your character is spending that time reflecting on their experience to gain the new skills, and it doubles as a means of requiring your character to sleep without being as oppressive as tiredness systems tend to be. Next is better harvesting, which basically increases the amount of ingredients you get by harvesting things, allowing for more potions to be made, which reduces the grind required to make the most of alchemy. Then we have Save the Salt, which reduces the amount of recipes that require salt pies, meaning that cooking can be a part of your game without you needing to constantly buy them. Moving on from that, I have added Realistic Conversations, which works to improve immersion when you're in the more densely populated cities, by making the way NPCs interact with each other and with you more realistic. Then we have Extended Stay, which simply allows you to rent rooms at inns and taverns for multiple nights at once. Next, I have 2 mods that help deal with some of the issues left behind upon completion of the Civil War questline. The first is After the Civil War, which allows you to donate to the temples in Whiterun, Windhelm, and Solitude after the battles to have the damages repaired and the city returned to normal. I also have Civil War Aftermath, which makes the commanders of opposing faction camps killable, so that you can actually go and clear them out instead of having to leave enemies lingering across the whole of Skyrim as you normally would. Then we have the Unofficial Skyrim Special Edition patch, which makes a ton of small useful bug fixes that were overlooked by Bethesda. These fixes are useful, but I mainly bring this up because huge amounts of other mods require this one in order to work, so it becomes an essential part of every modded playthrough out of necessity, really. Next is the Alternate Start mod, which is pretty much essential if you've played through the game a few times to give you some new options to begin with, and avoid needing to sit through the opening set piece on every character. I also have an add-on called New Beginnings that gives you even more options, and with the 2 of them you end up with a great selection of starting points to choose from. Finally, I would also recommend bringing the Cheat Room mod. There are of course a lot of great options available if you want to use the mod to cheat and play the game that way, but I always bring it more as a safety net from bugs. Realistically, when playing with mods, especially on a game made by Bethesda, bugs are a high possibility. And the Cheat Room toolkit can give you a lot of options for trying to fix conflicts that occur without having to resort to loading an older save. Of course, you could also just make it worse, so use with caution. Now I'm going to go over texture and animation mods, which are what I think can be the main contributors to improving your Skyrim experience and making it truly feel on a level of the current generation systems. With this being more about the appearance of the game, a lot of these types of mods are really going to be down to personal preference, so be sure to try out alternatives if you aren't as fond of some of the ones I picked. The first texture mod I have is Skyland All-in-One. I've tried a lot of different graphics packs on this game, and while there are others with a few features I prefer, this is my favourite overall. It also helps that it comes in one reasonably sized file, making installation less of a hassle. The mod changes the base textures of almost every environmental object in the game, meaning buildings, landscapes, roads, and plants all get new visuals, making it look a lot nicer. On PC, there are almost definitely more impressive options available, but for a good all-purpose texture mod that is easily run on console, I can't recommend anything better than this. Of course, this sort of texture mod doesn't affect items, so I have another mod to cover them, called Divergence. Naturally, there are other mods that serve this same purpose that I've even recommended before, like Old Kingdom, and to be entirely honest, I use that mod just as much as I do this one. It really can just come down to what you feel like using at the time. These are recoloring mods that make clothing and weapons look better, and stand out more against the environment. I think some highlights are the Dwarven and Elven sets, which are made to look a lot more vivid and grand. The main benefit of Divergence over other mods is the Creation Club support offered in add-ons, allowing for reworking of most of the armour found in the Anniversary Edition, which is great if that's something you're planning on using. I like to use both of them to create a different tone for the playthrough. Divergence is a bit darker and looks a bit more realistic, but Old Kingdom is a bit more colourful and shiny, so I would recommend giving both a look and choosing for yourself. I've also added enhanced lighting and visual effects, which essentially adds new shaders, making the lighting much better looking. There's a really nice glow that you get from light sources with this added, and it really goes a long way to improve the overall visuals. I've added Divine Creatures and Divine Wolves, which retextures most of the animals and monsters you come across. I like these mods over others because they don't completely rework the models and redesign the creatures as some do. Instead, they just subtly improve the original versions. Then we have Verdant and Water plants, which add some improved grass textures and other plants to both land and bodies of water. They look great, but can cause some FPS drops, which I've solved with the mod Less Grass, which removes the amount of grass around Skyrim and will prevent the frame rate issues. Obviously, how much this is needed is going to depend on what you're playing on. Next, we have Awesome Potions Simplified, which retextures potions and poisons to look nicer. You can now see the liquid inside as it glows a different colour depending on the effect of the potion. Then I also have JS Dragon Claws, which retextures the dragon claws to make them look a bit more ornate. Next, I have a mod that improves the look of the character animations called Vera Levi. This completely replaces basically all of your walk, run, stand, attack, and spellcast animations. The weapon attack animations look a lot smoother when multiple attacks are chained together. Two-handed weapons are now rested on your shoulder to make their weight more impactful, and a particular favourite of mine is the new draw sword animation, which just looks so much cooler. You also have multiple idle animations, which are switched between to make it look more like how a person would actually stand, unlike the vanilla game. It seems like a small thing, but honestly, this mod alone makes the game feel like it came out 5 years later than it actually did. To support this, I also have Violence, which allows you to modify the behaviour of kill moves, doing things like increasing their frequency and locking them in third or first person so you only see the moves that you want to. It really makes combat a bit more cinematic and visually exciting when playing as a fighter character. To go with this, we have Enhanced Blood Textures, which basically just adds more blood to the ground, walls, and screen during combat. It adds a lot more weight to the attacks, and makes it feel like a much more brutal and dangerous engagement, so it's another great one for building atmosphere. Next, I have a couple of texture changes that focus on specific elements of the game that I often think get neglected, starting with the loading screens. This mod swaps out the original screens with new pieces of artwork that look a lot better. I have used a few different mods that achieve this same effect, but prefer this one due to its significantly smaller file size. The pictures are of various things in the game, and all look incredible with much more vibrant colours than the original loading screens, so you have something a bit better to look at whilst you're waiting. Then I have a quality world map and pastel map markers, which work together to improve the visuals of your map. The pastel map markers simply replace the location icons with better looking ones, and the new map not only looks better, but is much more convenient to use. It makes the map much clearer and allows you to see roads and rivers without the same difficulty you would have on the original one. And I really like how distinct the coloured terrains are for the different holds. Next is Modern Perk Interface, which makes the skills screen look cooler, and is fully compatible with Valkyrie and Ordinator. Finally, I have Lockpicking Interface redone, which, as I'm sure you could have guessed, makes the lockpicking screen look nicer. In this section, I'm going to be covering mods that make changes to the world of Skyrim, generally acting to make it feel more populated and to make travelling more interesting. First of all is the mod JK's Skyrim, which makes visual changes everywhere, and honestly, it's incredible how much they managed to add considering how little the file size is. Every major town and city has a complete overhaul, making them look so much better. We also have a host of add-on and patch mods, including an interiors mod which mainly affects the longhouses and castles of the cities, making them look far more decadent and giving them each unique flair that reflects the hold that they're in. In particular, I liked the additions to Solitude and Windhelm. Solitude is made to look more like the trade capital it should, with a more bustling marketplace and a stronger sense of military presence. And Windhelm has a completely revamped Grey Quarter that looks like the slum it's supposed to be. I mainly use this mod for the work it does in the larger cities of Skyrim, Solitude, Whiterun, Markarth, Windhelm, and Riften, But for the small ones, while they do add a lot of great things, I wanted something a bit more. So I've also added villages, towns, and cities. This mod makes changes to a lot of small settlements across Skyrim, like Dragon's Bridge, making them bigger and more prominent, adding things like walls. But the main reason I went for this mod is because of the way it overhauls Dawnstar, Falkreath, Morthal, and Winterhold. Each of these cities are given so much more life. Winterhold in particular suffered in the base game from not really reflecting the grand city it used to be. But now with the addition of colossal ruins, you can see the city's former glory for yourself. The same can be said for the other cities, which have new features to reflect them better. Both of these mods have a whole host of add-ons, patches, and have multiple packs available with different versions. It took me a while to find ones that worked well together, so you'll want to check the load order in the description with author names to make sure you have everything you need and that they're the right versions. Next, I have a couple of mods that focus on improving more out-of-the-way areas around Skyrim, starting with unique bridges. I've mentioned this mod before in videos, and for good reason. It revamps almost every bridge in Skyrim with something more visually exciting and unique. The bridges will look more memorable, and they'll reflect the area around them to make the bridges in different environments look as though they were built in different ways, using different resources. To go with this, I also have bridges, ferries, and fords, which add some extra crossing points to some of the rivers of Skyrim, so that you don't have to resort to swimming. The ferries also act as a sort of fast travel system between a handful of locations, so if you are a player who doesn't like to use the map fast travel, then these can become useful places to remember when planning your routes. Then we have immersive hold borders, which adds checkpoints to the edges of every hold manned with guards. They help make Skyrim feel more populated, and do a lot to combat the lack of atmosphere with regards to the Civil War. It also can make travelling more complex and interesting if you are playing the game as a criminal character, with the main roads being a less safe option. Next, I used Place of Power, which revamps the standing stones, making them more dramatic locations that are more interesting to visit. Then we have Schlitzers, Villages and Settlements, which scatters new villages around Skyrim complete with shops and inns. With these mods combined, the roads of Skyrim become far more interesting and busy, so journeying without fast travel becomes so much more enjoyable. Next, I have a mod that improves both the large cities and the open spaces between them, by bringing them more together. This mod is Open Cities, and you've probably heard of it before now, but for those of you who haven't, it quite simply removes the need for a loading screen when passing through a gateway to enter a city, which makes arriving at these locations a more immersive experience. It can have a couple of issues with some scripted sequences, but those are few and far between. Also, it now opens up the possibility of dragons attacking these cities, which I was worried about due to the risk of civilian deaths, but I had it happen in Riften, and the guards just annihilated it without me needing to help. Now I also have a music mod called Organic View, which I really like over other music mods because it feels like more of an upgrade than it does a replacement of the vanilla music set. What I mean is, the new tracks are mixed in with the existing ones, and they fit seamlessly, adding a bit more epic fantasy to combat music, while still sounding like Elder Scrolls. Some of the original tracks are enhanced, whilst still being recognisable, and there are some specific tracks that are linked to specific things, like special battle music for Harkon's boss fight, and I also heard what I think was a unique track for Fort Dawnguard, which is really cool. Finally, I have Mythic Ages, which is a complete weather overhaul mod. I've used a large variety of weather mods in this game, and I think I would describe this one as my favourite. It tends to lean more on the extreme end with some of its visuals, and I think they look really great. The storms and blizzards are very intense and really create an atmosphere of harsh conditions as you're travelling around the world, making it harder to see where you're going, leading to a more hazardous journey. I've coupled this mod with RAS Shaders and Effects, which is a light version of the mod Wet and Cold, which is also available if you prefer. The mods cause things like rain and snow to have more of an effect on your character model, with your clothes becoming damp and snow sticking to you. It sounds like a small thing, but it really makes a difference, and the Wet and Cold version adds in new clothes for NPCs to wear, in certain weathers, like hoods and gloves. Now, I have a handful of mods that add or change items or creatures in the world, and I'm going to start with unique Thane weapons, which revamp all of the weapons that are given to you when you become the Thane of a hold, giving them each their own visual style and new enchantments to make them feel more worthwhile than their base game versions. I don't think I've ever used the Thane weapons when playing vanilla, because they suffer in the same way a lot of the game loot does, struggling to be relevant when compared with items you create yourself. But with this mod, they actually had a place in my character's progression, which is exactly what I was hoping for. Next, I have a selection of bag mods that are useful for upgrading your carrying limit. First of all are backpacks and shoulderpacks. They both allow for the creation of fur bags that look great, and my personal preference is the shoulderpack variety, although they don't work well if you're wearing a cloak. Another option is the Creation Club backpack mod if you have the anniversary update. These bags are a bit more varied and are tailored to fit themes like Thief and Mage, which is really cool. Finally, we have Bandoliers, bags and pouches. This can work alongside other backpack mods because the bandoliers are added to your belt and chest, and are considered separate by the game, allowing them to be equipped alongside other bags. There is a great variety of pouches available to make, letting you really customize your character's look, and there are some special variants that can only be found on certain enemies, such as ones with Imperial or Dark Brotherhood designs. This mod is, however, definitely a bit unbalanced. With the full range of equipment on, your carry limit will be over 700. So if you are doing a survival-heavy playthrough where your carry limit is an important factor, you may want to be careful how many of these mods you install. Moving on from that, we have Cloaks and Capes, which, as you might have guessed, adds a variety of cloaks and capes into the game. They are fully craftable at tanning racks, and some can only be found on NPCs. For example, hold guards now have special cloaks themed around their home, which look really cool. I mainly like this mod because it adds cloaks to the leveled lists and gives them to NPCs and enemies, helping sell the idea that Skyrim is as cold as it looks. And the mod works with the survival mode and with Frostfall, so they will actually protect you from the harsh weather. Then I've added artifacts, which improves all of the unique artifacts in Skyrim, giving them more utility in the endgame, by modifying their enchantments and buffing most of their base stats to be at least in line with glass gear. As mods that target this specific area go, this is on the lighter side, but it does everything I want it to do, and it has a texture add-on available for Divergence, so your improved artifact designs will fit the colouring of everything else in the game. I've also added belt-worn Dragon Priest masks, which allows you to attach the Dragon Priest masks to your belt, while still receiving the full effect. I like to have my characters not wear a helmet, so this is a useful way to get the powerful enchantments without having to cover my face. They also look really cool when attached to your belt, and offer multiple slots, allowing you to combine enchantment effects for your character. Generally speaking, it doesn't work very well with mods that change the textures of the Dragon Priest masks, it just uses the base textures instead. So if you're using Old Kingdom, they're not going to look quite as cool as they would if you were wearing them. Next, I have scoped bows and simple scoped crossbows, which add in scoped variants of the game's ranged weapons. These are obviously not necessary due to the in-game crosshair, but they're still a cool addition if you like to play as an archer, and the crosshair can easily be disabled in the menus. It's very easy to craft the scoped version of bows, and they can be found on enemies and in chests just like regular ones. And scoped crossbows can be created once you've progressed the Dawnguard far enough to craft your own crossbows. The only issue with these mods is they only work with vanilla versions of the weapons, which makes sense, but it means if you have any other mods or Creation Club content, such as the expanded crossbows mods, they won't have scoped variants available to them. I personally tend to not use the scoped crossbow mod as much as I use the scoped bows mod for this reason, but I wanted to still mention it so you have the option. Now I have two of the mods I use on pretty much every playthrough: Visible Favorited Gear and Belt Fastened Quivers. Visible Favorited Gear makes any equipment you have favorited appear on your character model, and Belt Fastened Quiver moves the quiver to a more realistic position. The only issue is that it doesn't work with Vera Levi, so you will have to pick your preference. Finally, we have Wearable Lanterns, which allows you to craft belt-attached lanterns, which act as a light source when you are travelling in the dark. You can also turn on a fuel mode, requiring you to obtain lamp oil to keep it from burning out. And there are some variant versions available, such as Torchbook in a jar. That's my entire list, thanks for watching. I'm planning on doing some polls in my community page to find out what sort of mod packs you'd like to see next, so be sure to subscribe to not miss that.